Right lads, gather around, because today we're diving into one of the most talked about and ultimately tragic tales of recent football history. I'm talking about the one and only Nicolas Pépé, and how a transfer that seemed like a surefire success turned into one of Arsenal's most significant disappointment in recent years. Now, before we go off on a rant about the flop of the century in my opinion, let's set the scene. It was 2019, Arsenal was on the hunt for that one marquee signing to push them back into the Prem's top 4 and to re-establish themselves as a dominant force in English football. Enter Nicolas Pépé, the Ivorian winger from French club Lille, who had been tearing it up in Ligue 1 with pace to burn, a trick or two up his sleeve and an eye for goal. He seemed like exactly what Arsenal needed. In fact, it was a £72 million deal. That's not loose change, lads. That's serious money. But then, after the dust settled and the excitement of a big money signing wore off, the reality hit home. The Pépé disaster was well and truly in full swing. When Pépé signed for Arsenal in August of 2019, you could almost feel the collective optimism in the air. Fans were buzzing. Finally, they thought a winger with real pace, someone who could stretch defences and offer something different to the likes of Alexander Lacazette and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. The dream was alive. Pépé arrived from Lille after bagging 22 goals and 11 assists in Ligue 1, proving that he was more than just a flash in the pan. The transfer fee alone was enough to get people talking. 72 million! Just a bit of pocket change for a player who, at the time, had a lot of promise, but still had to prove himself on the big stages. The excitement was infectious. Fans flooded social media to share their excitement. Memes were flying about, and pundits were calling Pépé the missing piece of Arsenal's puzzle. I mean, who wouldn't get carried away? The guy was fast, skilled and had an eye for goal. Surely he was going to be the answer to the Gunners' wing problems. The early signs were promising, don't get me wrong. At least in the sense that he had a few moments of brilliance that suggested the 72 million quid price tag. And that it might not be completely fucking mental. His debut season started with a few shaky performances, but there were flashes of magic, like a superb free kick against Newcastle United, or his excellent dribbles against Burnley and Southampton. But there was something about Pépé's game that didn't quite click. Fans were quick to praise his potential, but they couldn't ignore his inconsistent displays. Some weeks he looked like a world beater, and other weeks he seemed like he was lost at sea. His touch wasn't always clean, his decision making was often questioned, and he seemed to lack that cutting edge you'd expect from a player of his price tag. Still, fans were patient. It was only his first season after all. Who hasn't had a shaky start in a new league? Surely things would only get better, right? Then came the real issue, the decline. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Pépé suddenly turned into a terrible player overnight, but the inconsistencies turned him. What started as a small concern began to snowball into genuine problems. His stats dipped, his performance fluctuated, the bright moments became fewer and farther between. Let's talk about his goal contribution for a second. In his first season, Pépé managed 10 Premier League goals and 4 assists. It's not bad, you know, it's better than I do. But when you break down the numbers, you start to see the issue. Many of his goals came in flashes of brilliance against lower half teams, where his individual brilliance could shine. But in the bigger games, when Arsenal needed him the most, he often went missing. Fans started to get frustrated. Where was the £72 million worth of talent? What happened to the guy who was supposed to be the next big thing? The one who had terrorised defences with his pace and trickery. Arsenal had invested heavily in Pépé, and they expected results. Unfortunately, what they got was a player who could show promise, but never deliver consistently. By the time Arteta took over as Arsenal manager in December 2019, Pépé was already beginning to show signs of being a luxury player. The type of player who could be great if everything was right around him, but struggled when things weren't going his way. Arteta, who had inherited a squad full of underperforming stars, was tasked with the impossible: reviving Arsenal's fortunes. Unfortunately, Pépé didn't fit into Arteta's tactical system as well as some hoped. Arteta's philosophy, based on a structured, disciplined, team-oriented approach, often left Pépé struggling. The freedom to express himself was often limited, and he wasn't as effective in the way Arteta wanted to set up the team. Pépé, for all his qualities, wasn't always the most intelligent player off the ball. His decision making, both in terms of passing and possession, was often erratic. It became clear that Arteta didn't trust Pépé as much as fans would have liked. He started to play him less and less, relegating him to substitute appearances or bringing him on in games where the result was all but decided. For a player with such a high transfer fee, this was a disaster. Arteta was the one who promised to get the best out of him, but the reality was far from a dream. Fast forward to 2022, and the inevitable happened. Pépé was sent out on loan to Ligue 1 club Nice. The move was seen as a way to give him a chance to reignite his career. but also as a confirmation that his time at Arsenal had run its course. The player who was once meant to be a superstar at the Emirates was now seeking a fresh start in France. But let's be real, this was the final chapter in what only can be described as a disaster. A 72 million signing reduced to a loan move. How did we get here? How did a player with so much talent end up being nothing more than a backup option who was shipped out on loan? At Nice, Pepe showed glimpses of his former self, but even there, the consistency was lacking. It was clear he had the technical ability, but his confidence was shot. His days at Arsenal were marked by frustration, and it seemed like the player he saw at Lille was gone for good. So, where does this leave us? A 72 million quid signing who couldn't live up to the hype. A player whose time at Arsenal will forever be seen as a disappointment. Pepe's fall from grace is a case study in what happens when big money transfers don't work out. He's a talented player, don't get me wrong, but at Arsenal his time was marked by inconsistency, poor decision making, and an inability to fit into the system. The club will likely never see a return on their investment, and the fans will always look back at his time at Arsenal with a sense of what could have been. But in the end, Pepe's story is a cautionary tale. Not every big money signing works out, no matter how much promise they have. The massive investment failed to yield the dividends Arsenal had hoped for. They were expecting a star, but instead they got a player who was at best a squad rotation player. And in the cutthroat world of football, that's simply not good enough. Look, at the end of the day, football is full of stories of highs and lows, and Pepe's time at Arsenal is certainly one of them roller coasters. A player with so much promise, so much hype even, and so much potential. But ultimately, Pepe disaster will go down as one of those cautionary tales in football. Sometimes things just don't work out. He's now with Villarreal, and the stats aren't really promising. He joined in 2024 and he scored 3 goals in 28 games. But the question is, will he return to his best at Villarreal? Who knows? And that, my friends, is the tragedy of Nicolas Pépé. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.